Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another exciting episode of the Transform Your Confidence show. I'm a firm believer that content is still king because its ability to create powerful connections is key to always being relevant as a brand. However we connect and what tools we use is what determines the success of our business and also its failure. So getting the formula right from branding to content strategy to dialing into a go-to marketing plan are all important components to accomplish brand loyalty and the acquisition of sales. And this is exactly what this week's theme of branding and marketing is all about. My two-part series is entitled The Power of Content Strategy to Brand and Market Your Business for Success. My guest is one of Canada's preeminent thought leaders in content strategy, Mohit Rajans, and here's what we cover in part 2. We talk about what the 3 reasons are for using content strategy, what the difference is between editorial and marketing content, where to incorporate editorial content versus marketing content when communicating with the public to get brand loyalty. Then we go into a case study of where a well-known brand used editorial and marketing content really well to convert audiences to its brand mission and grow exponentially because of it. And then we close off discussing where brands get this formula wrong and how to rectify it. Here's a bit about Mohit before I bring him on. He's a seasoned media professional who has produced, interviewed and hosted big-name celebrities and worked with major media companies like Rogers Communications and Cineplex Digital. His recent book, Rethinking Your Content, reached #1 on Amazon.ca, and he has been recognized by the Real World Film Festival with the Trailblazer Award. He owns one of Canada's longest running movie blogs, mohitmovies.com, and is launching an interview series about fatherhood this fall at dadspotting.com. Please welcome to part 1 of the show, Mohit Rajans. Hey Mohit,
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me also on this platform. You have been on my journey ever since the get-go in all the different brands that I've been involved in all the different iterations of those brands. And I'm just so happy that I can bring you in on this particular platform because this podcast truly, it's created to service and help people to kind of bridge that gap between, school and academia and, wanting to be competitive and, confident in the work arena, which, as you and I know, is constantly changing at a far more rapid speed than it ever was in our parents' generation or generations before, because it's predicated on a lot of disruption that's taking place, that technology is really moving us into a lot of directions that a lot of kind of the academic institutions are very kind of far behind in making those changes happen by default of the fact that they're institutions. So we know even from a multinational, corporate perspective, the bigger you are, the longer it takes for you to implement change because there's so much red tape and layers of it that you got to go through. So the most agile of us are those people who are able to affect change quickly. So with that said, I'm excited to have you on this particular episode, and I've been waiting to do this one because I wanted to do it with you. Folks, yes, absolutely. And folks, I've already kind of, explained to you why Mohit is someone that I think is a really important thought leader in this space before we brought him on. So I'm going to just jump right into it if you're cool with that, Mohit.
Let's rock.
Let's do it. So just to kind of preface getting into this, because I want to kind of break it down, because a lot of people think that, content, it's marriage to branding and its ability to kind of convert through marketing and get more clients and engage more people and to get kind of brand loyalty is an easy thing. Like people think you just put stuff out there and somehow it just all magically happens. But there is major strategy, there's data analytics, there's all kinds of thought that goes behind what that formula looks like, from branding to content to marketing to acquisition. So, you know, with that said, we're going to focus today on the content piece and how that kind of fits into the wheelhouse of all of this. Content is still king because it's a connector, and whenever something is used to connect, it will always have relevance, no matter what technology is being brought to the table. This is my belief. And it is something that I feel that will never change so long as people understand how to use it. So however we connect and what tools we use is what determines the success of the acquisition and also of its failure, is basically the point that I'm making. And this is why I'm super happy to have you come on and share your insights on what people should be thinking about and looking at doing that is most effective today, because what's effective today may not be effective tomorrow, right? And I also want them to know how to accomplish good content strategy, even from a benchmarks perspective, that even as technology keeps disrupting and changing the way that we need to look at it and how we can use it, just like everything in life, there's always a few benchmarks that never really change. So with that said, here's my first question to you, my darling. I want to ask you, to start, I kind of want to start at the beginning of where I feel the beginning needs to be. And it's assuming that not everyone watching, listening, or reading this understands what content actually is. So let's start there, Mohit. Without going into how to use it and what the advantages or disadvantages are of content, can you just simply, in your own kind of understanding of it, of being a content person for the last over 2 decades, can you tell everyone what content is? Like a definition or an understanding from a perspective that they would understand?
I always refer to it as content as being messaging, and it's messaging in multiple forms on various platforms. And it's up to you on how you decide that. So content for me, for example, has 3 purposes. You're either connecting with it, you're doing it for the culture, or there's a commerce element to it. The connection is the one-on-one, the messaging we do on a daily basis, things that we want to do, and we send memes to each other. The culture has a lot to do with how we grow up and we start to understand that whatever values that we're interested in, we might make a song, we might write a blog post, we might be involved in a place where we know we're creating a voice for an underprivileged group. That's where the culture part of it should never take you away from creating content. And then there's the commerce part. Is there an exact function for what you're creating and how it's going to acquire an audience or create a sale? And those 3 things boil down to what is the message of what you're creating when it comes to content.
Right. So let's look at that piece then a little bit based on what you just said there, Mohit. What's the difference between editorial content and marketing content? And the reason why I'm making it that black and white is just because there are so many different variations of both of those. And there's so much kind of cross-pollination that in order to kind of decipher it on some level so we can benchmark it, I'm putting it into 2 buckets. So editorial content versus marketing content. What essentially is the difference between the two, if there is one?
So the purest answer is that editorial you never pay for. And so editorial is a natural relationship in which you go through a gatekeeper to be able to tell a story on another medium. So your newspapers, your televisions, your radios, etc. So if I want to go and pitch the fact that Mohit is phenomenal to a radio station, that gatekeeper will have to decipher that A, am I phenomenal? B, is there a story here? And C, does your audience need to see it? But I could pay and do the Mohit marketing with that content and say, I want to be on your network, put the Mohit show marketing content on your thing, and then we work on how that was best positioned. both have viability, right? I mean, if I want to market on your favorite, the best show on a TV program on a TV station, then I'm going to work on my advertising content to be the prime hook there. But if I'm going to be interviewed on a TV show, I'm going to need to work on what my messaging is in that situation, and it's entirely different. The one thing that I think people need to decipher, though, is that the editorial gatekeepers, when it comes down to content, really have different agendas based on every different type of show. So gone are the days where you can send out a press release and hope that a bunch of media will all of a sudden be interested in it, because everybody has their own separate type of audience that they cater to. And so what they've learned from the digital realm is that the niching down that we see in the digital realm from a content perspective is starting to work within the traditional editorial sense as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there's digital editorial as well. There's various blogs, etc., that consider themselves digital editorial, and you pitch them. They are the gatekeepers. They have the mass media, but they're also not. The difference with that is that you can throw a sponsored article into an editorial feed, and sometimes it's a little confusing, right? And so they don't have necessarily the same. You'll very rarely see a TV commercial on TV without realizing that that's a commercial. Whereas with digital, sometimes it's a little bit more, they try to make it a little more seamless and call it advertorials.
And that's the thing, right? That's the whole kind of native, advertising or native marketing, which has made branding so huge today, where branding is so important because, how do we say the same thing in a different manner? So it goes from being obviously salesy to being authentically storytelling. And I think that line between church and state, especially since the couple of decades you and I have been in the game, has drastically blurred, right?
Yeah.
Especially because of the digital online platform game. People don't really know if this story that they're being fed is one that's been written by a journalist, which is editorial, versus whether it's been written for pay. And really, what is the difference? Or partnerships. Like these are all things that didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
Until digital came along. Or if they did exist, they were more behind the scenes and not something, they were packaged as, either editorial or marketing.
But I think that, Raj, if you don't mind me saying, I think the one thing people often forget is that advertising runs whatever media we're talking about. And so what we're forgetting sometimes is that, as high and mighty the number one newscast might be in the country, or the number one paper, they still are paper thin if there's no advertising, or if they're so. The balance that we have to consider now in any content strategy that requires both what we refer to as a paid and earned strategy, is that we have to consider that the platforms individually need to be told what the value is now, not sold what the value is. So we have to now. I speak to producers all the time about doing segments and stuff, and when we have those conversations, I have to tell them what the value is now, not sell them on it. And so it's important to understand that, because they in turn go to another person and say, this is a great way for us to open up this for this audience. And then that person ends up saying yes. With marketing, though, I will tell you, you could, let's just say with traditional, you tried to get a story on for 3 months on a product that you're selling juice, right? And they wouldn't do the morning show, etc. If you turn that around and use your ad dollars, you will get a segment on that show. You know what I mean? And so that's just proof that it's not the same anymore. It's not the profit has to be, and for many of the big companies that we're referring to, the media side is the loss leader. It's not even the one that actually makes the money. So one of the pieces of advice, if you don't mind me throwing out there,
please don't
live and die by what's happening in traditional media world, because it's not currently designed to facilitate the vast amount of content that is available out there on multiple platforms. It's just not there right now. And people are spending way too much money on strategy that's supposed to be complementary, when they could use that time and effort and just find their audience by focusing on one or two major things.
Right. That's such an important takeaway. So how would you suggest to people out there who want to, put a product out there, how would you suggest to them to kind of go to market from an advertising versus a marketing content perspective? So if we keep it in the wheelhouse of content, right?
Well,
Like, what would you say to them would be the best way to do it? Because, you know, a lot of people have a thing about, like, a hang up about, well, you know, I don't want to pay for, you know, my segment, or I don't want to pay for, you know, my article. But in essence, you kind of sort of are. Either you're paying them
somebody's
directly. Yeah. Either you're paying them directly, or you're paying a PR company to go get it for you that has the relationships with them. Either way, right, you're paying someone, whether it's direct or indirect. So how do we remove that kind of church and state for people, for want of a better way, you know?
So I think that we have to, here's a bold statement that you should tell everybody, but organic is dead, okay? Google is not a search engine. Google is a ranking engine. Google ranks articles. It doesn't search for you. For priority in finding you in Google ends up being 7 ads before you're being found. Yeah. And if a big media company like that isn't an indication that organic is dead, then you're ignoring the obvious signs. All of these social media platforms are media platforms on social. They have advertising within them. They've got walled gardens, as we call them, where they want you to stay within their advertising platforms. Facebook owns Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook and WhatsApp. Yeah, and something else, I'm sure. And you know, they want you as the creator. They want you, or you as the creator, you as the brand person, you as the marketer. They want you to spend your ad dollars in these places, and they're creating those tools so that you become a rock star. So you feel like you're, you know, doing your best creative on there to show people what you're doing. You're marketing your podcast. They will make you feel like that connection is possible by 2 reasons. One, they're showing you the demographics that are available for the content with a clear, concise, this is how you target. And 2, they're walking you through how easy it is to create an ad. You know how difficult it used to be? You know how difficult it used to be a decade ago to get a graphic designer to create an ad for you?
Yeah.
It was a requisite, it was money, it was iterations, it was now these social media platforms are getting to a point where if Raj just feels like she's going to sell a brand new fan or mask, you know, you can get that designed, done, put on Facebook, ready for sale within minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think we have to remember we're in a place now where it's anyway. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're not at all. This is actually really wonderful, because it leads to my next question, which is, you know, both editorial and marketing content is used today to solicit different touch points with the consumer, right? You've just kind of finished prefacing that for our audience. My question to you is, where would you suggest brands use editorial content, knowing that you've just said what you've said, versus marketing content when communicating with the consumer? Because as far as, you know, you're public facing, the consumer sees this is editorial, this is marketing, regardless of what you and I know is happening behind the scenes. Right.
I think the 2 biggest factors any communications plan should consider with reference to how editorial can work is how are you well, first of all, I think one gateway that is completely underutilized with reference to how corporations and brands can use it is through corporate social responsibility. I don't think companies do enough right now to really explain to people how much they're involved in communities, how much they've been spending thousands of dollars in various causes, etc. And I think it's very important, because we forget this is an exploitation. If I go and I show that my corporation was involved in a run for the cure or a raising of this, etc., they get the benefit, the company gets the benefit, plus we get the benefit from our altruistic. And I think those editorial stories end up pushing way more value than me stopping and saying, come and buy, you know, a bunch of printers that I'm trying to sell through my company. So that's one thing. The second thing I don't think that companies are doing enough of right now is they're not telling the stories about their employees. We're seeing a lot of leadership, great celebrations. And unfortunately, because of the diversity push, it became a little bit too much too late again. So now then you started to see companies starting to really celebrate employees to fill the gap. And that's not what we want to see. I think there's great marketing potential in your brand by going internally a little bit and telling some of those stories from an editorial standpoint. And I'll give you one last thing. When there are many companies right now that pride themselves on the innovation that their employees bring to the table. But why is it that we very rarely see that celebration on LinkedIn? We rarely see that story sort of get played out as a result of how that, this one employee brought this one idea to something that became something. That's where I think the content should go when it comes to editorial. You can try on the innovation side, which a lot of companies do, and I see that, where you think that your innovative product has a story to tell that's going to change. But that's what every press release is, right? Every press release says, hey, we're game changing. We're going to offer this and we're going to make it this way. That's why you should tell this story. But I think we're getting into a world now where, this next generation isn't necessarily going to care as much about whether this is written by a film critic or written by somebody who's talking about the film because they, were paid for it. So I think we're going to see a little bit less of concern. The concerns that you and I have, I think, are a little bit rooted in the fact that relationship building was done based on principles and relationship building was based on understandings. But let's be honest, Raj, a lot of the people that were leaders in the game that we're talking about, which is media, are behind a lot of the problems that we see today. If you don't have the foresight to continue to understand how that growth happens, then you're not going to be able to sustain the business. Why is it that the media leaders in this country have been able to completely watch the ship sail past them and still maintain their position? It doesn't make sense, right? So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think the consumers that we're raising right now amongst us are starting to notice a little bit less about what should be here and what should be here, and more so, what do I want? What's my personal? What are you curating for me?
It's interesting that you're saying that, because I had this conversation actually with somebody else regarding branding, and I want to kind of bring it back round to that, Mohit, and let me share a little bit about that conversation, because I think that you'll find it interesting. So I basically spoke to them and I said, listen, so we are living in a workforce environment today where it's, even though a lot of it is still top down, which is kind of, the infrastructure that was created 150 years ago by the Industrial Revolution, even though that is a lot of what the corporate structure is, right? And is what you're talking about with the big media houses, they're still top down, right? And LinkedIn is still top down. But the thing is that the workforce today, at least in North America, right, 70% of it is either millennial, Zoomer, and that generation, right? So if you look at that, you look at our parents' generation, right, who had their jobs for 30 years, right? You look at our generation where we have multiple different jobs, right? And we've done them for different periods of time. And then you look at this generation, which is more your gig economy, where literally most of them are kind of flying around in between different companies, because the importance to them isn't the company as much as it is their value, the value that they feel they need to get out of that company. So you and I were in that kind of in between the two generations of our parents and this generation, right? Where we did feel the importance of, the powers that be, but we also kind of started to kind of kick up a bit and say, listen, I've got something to say here. But we still didn't have the power to do that. Now, you look at this generation, you look at the millennials, you look at the Zoomer generation, they completely and utterly do not follow the same value system. They don't care that you're important. What they care is, what are they getting out of you? Which is why, right? Which is why there's a huge kind of disconnect between the multi-generational workforce that is out there. There's you and me from Gen X, right? You're a Gen Xer, right? Okay, so there's you and me in the Gen X world. There's the millennials, and then we're sitting with the Zoomers. All three of us, and some baby boomers, right? All of these generations today are working together, who all have a different value system that they operate under and that they work under than it ever was in yours and my generation and all preceding generations. I feel that has a lot to do with why branding has become so incredibly important. And you can't be successful today if you don't dial in what your brand vision, mission, value system is, and the storytelling component of that, because all of a sudden now you're dealing with multiple values in the workforce.
Yeah.
So, like, what's your comment on that? Because this
Yeah.
is a lot more of a complicated solution, I believe, than it's ever been in the past. I don't think we've ever faced this that we've faced today with multiple generations with different value systems that are in the workforce. Talk to me a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think that you bring up a really great point. But what's surprising to me is that how are we still missing the boat on how we market to people when we're all working? We're, so we let's just say hypothetically diversity worked, and that what you just referred to was that in a perfect world scenario, there were 4 or 5 generations in a boardroom, and we're all talking about how to make sure that this is compliant, that this is on brand, that this is not tone deaf, etc. We're still making mistakes. And so, as much as I'd like to think that a perfect world exists where all different generations can work together to come up with solutions that the future generations can benefit from, I do believe that the biggest gaps that I'm noticing still has to do with leadership. And while we're all still, we might all be there, we're not letting the right people up. We're not letting we're not utilizing the right amount of resources in order. I've been to meetings at agencies. I've been to meetings in newsrooms. I've coached people. I've done media training for people, and I can see that this reflection stuff is not happening yet. It's not, and we're not like, don't get me wrong, not in what we call like recently I called it diversity 2.0 because I think you and I were around for diversity 1.0. We were
Yes.
the ones that they originally were just like, oh, you kind of look like you might be able to fit the part. We're just like, yeah, okay, well, let's go. But what I'm saying is diversity 2.0 hasn't really found its way yet. But going back to the marketing side, what I think is ironic is that I refer often to meeting your audience there, right? So if all of our audience is in our workplace now, and we're still not finding the right way to hit the right tones, manage our messages, get to the right people, then why are we on? Like, why are we here? Like, why are we all working together? If we can't bring that value, the human value of what we're trying to do to this company, this brand, or whatever we're doing, I don't really see the point of what we're doing. But I will say that the opportunity is fantastic. So
Absolutely. So I think that, just to kind of, and not to belabor the point, but I feel that it has a lot to do with the fact that this is where the missing gap is. It's a reason why, the knowledge industry, coaching, consulting, mentorship is growing, so rapidly because there is this huge gap between what we're taught and thrown into the workforce with and what's actually happening in the workforce, right? And what is not working. There's a huge gap there.
right. So
And
one quick
yeah,
point to that, because you
yeah.
did mention something about the disconnect with the me generation versus the think like the respect factor and all that stuff. It's also a generation that's not afraid to skill up. And I think that Gen X is really on the verge right now of making one big mistake, which is, well, I got this. I know what I'm doing. I get it. No, you need to be digitally literate for the next generation, regardless of what workforce you're in. You need to be up on what exactly is happening, on how people are connecting with each other. And you definitely need to understand how communication is changing, because it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Especially for Gen X's, I'm warning you, don't think that just because you're savvy enough to have the latest iPhone, that you really know what's going on. You're going to be raising kids in some cases, and your business is going to be growing exponentially. Stay on top of it. As smart as you were to be the first people in your household to register for those emails and get your Google stuff ready and get your Facebook ready, keep that, because it's important for you to be a leader in whatever space you're in.
Absolutely. And to actually open the door for dialogue from all different generations, all walks of life, people
Yeah,
who,
be curious.
yeah, oh my God, that's the word. That is the magic word right there. And I think that that word is extremely important in business. So let me loop us back around again. Can
Sure.
you share, Mohit, any example where a brand used editorial content really well to convert audiences to their product or service? Like where did it work?
Well, I think there's two separate story. Well, actually, let me tell you what, and I'm going to go back to corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
So, in my TV days, we would dedicate an entire like morning sort of thing for Disney and Dreams Take Flight. And what they would do is they would model a complete airplane, right? and they would take kids from sick kids in underprivileged areas, etc., for a day at Disney and fly them back. Wonderful experience. Every news organization covers it, right? It's not a bot situation. Disney doesn't pay for that, and it just becomes something that it's on every newscast, and that's editorial that benefits everybody. It benefits the children's charities that are involved. It benefits whatever airline is involved. It benefits obviously Disney because they get the highlights. That to me is the type of stuff that brands are going to have to do a little bit more of in order to stand out in a crowd.
And is there anyone that you feel that is doing a real bad job of branding? Like, is there an example that kind of pops into your head of maybe a company or a brand that people know, even if it's historically
I
speaking
don't
and
know.
not
I
right
don't know
now?
if, well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of tone deaf stuff still happening. And I think we're starting to see that even in the way multicultural agencies are being called to task over the way that they've decided to put into a sausage maker what language variations of things can be. And you saw that, you can see that with the way government contracts have been with messaging around the pandemic and stuff. There are a lot of companies that don't know the difference between outreach and anyway, let's not get into that. But one of the things I did want to mention is that I find it really odd that we spend a lot of time, marketing companies spend a lot of, sorry, are we on the editorial question or the marketing question? I forget now.
We're on the editorial question, and then we're going to flip
Oh,
over
okay.
to marketing. Yeah.
Right. So the editorial that's bad, I'm not going to cite one thing specifically, but I'm just going to mention that crisis communications, sorry, crisis communications ends up being the most difficult one to sort of try to get a hold of. And I think that there's way too many people that are trying to live in a world where dealing with things from a crisis communication standpoint, that sounds like the best way to do it. And there's it just seems to me like not the right approach. You want to tell your side of the story, use your social media channels to do it from one place. Don't try to get multiple stories about it because it will turn on you. People need the story. People don't need you in that situation. You know what I mean? So I think that it's important for people to be careful about how they address situations, because negative editorial can come up from anything, especially if you're trying to clean up something.
Absolutely. So just to kind of regroup on that before we go into the marketing side of things, when you're looking at editorial content, are there any benchmarks that you can share that, this is good thing to do and this is not a good thing to do for people who really can't wrap their head around how to, incorporate content strategy in business?
Yeah, I think that
When it's editorial, like.
right. I think the bigger thing that people forget to do is that the world has changed, and so I'll give you a prime example. I've been emailing a producer for the past not 3 years, but a producer from 3 years ago in an exchange, and I couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting back to me, and I realized he had moved on. Right, shows have been canceled, papers are done. Email lists have been updated, new energies have formed, new shows have formed, new podcasts have formed. I think one of the things that we're missing right now is that we tend to think we know most of what we need to know, and those relationships aren't being built with new people, and that we find that what you need to make sure is that if you know where your audience, customer base, or the person you're trying to attract, the groups that you're trying to attract, if you know where they are, that's where you need to go replicate and become a part of that conversation. Because the one thing I have to remind people is that the fact that you're even listening to this conversation makes you 3 steps ahead of most people. I can't tell you, Raj, how many times I've had to sort of back myself off from giving people strategy advice based on the fact that they're not even at a place yet where they could wrap their mind around it. So I want people to be encouraged that if you are listening to this conversation, if you are somebody who is interested in how digital content and communications is going to further your brand and career, you are already 3 steps ahead by soaking in this knowledge, because there's so many people that are just ignorant to it and not even paying attention yet, and only pay attention when it's too late and then wonder why their things aren't doing too well. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's not worth it. And it's so much innovations happening separately on these platforms that it would be impossible to keep up if you just start now.
Thank you so much for staying till the end, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this show and will action the many insights that were shared. At the crux of this very complex discussion about content strategy and how to dial it in is the notion of understanding your brand intimately. If this is something that you're not fully sure you have dialed in, then I invite you to register for my free branding masterclass that I'm launching on Monday, April the 26th for 2 weeks. You can hop over to my website at the openchessconfidenceacademy.com and click on the top banner that gives you access to register for free. I'm confident that attending this will change the way you look at branding because I've seen how it has changed the trajectory of brands that have incorporated my insights in the past through working with me one-on-one. I welcome you to register to learn what successful brands are doing to get it right. And if there's anyone in your personal network that you feel should also attend, let them know now because we have a cap on how many people we can host through the platform that we are using to bring the masterclass to you. My hope with this episode is that it will open your mind to think about your relationship with content and whether you feel that what was shared in this episode could help you to step it up to ensure that what you intend to accomplish with your company to connect deeper with your ideal client is in fact what your content strategy is positioned to do. If you found this episode to be valuable, I ask that you subscribe to this podcast on the Apple, Android, and Spotify platforms. Search the Transform Your Confidence Show. On YouTube at the Open Chess Confidence Academy. And if you're an avid reader, we're also transcribing every podcast into a blog, which can be accessed at the openchessconfidenceacademy.com/media/our-media. And please share with your networks so others can garner the insights that I bring into each carefully curated show each week. And I invite you to join me in my private Facebook group at Transform Your Confidence, where I share knowledge and resources about mindset, media, communications, branding, marketing, leadership, and advocacy for busy executives and entrepreneurs like you who are seeking to elevate the quality of their life. I pop into the group regularly to answer questions that the members may have on any of these topics, so hop on over. It's free and insightful and full of great networking opportunities with people from around the world who, like you, are seeking to grow and level up and accomplish the next big thing in their lives. And as always, thanks for tuning in, guys. Until next episode, take care of yourself.